Well, welcome everyone. I know that some people will continue to join us, but we're really pleased that you're here to learn more about applying for GSA's summer policy internship. Before we begin, there's a couple of housekeeping rules, and I'll ask that we advance the slide. Please introduce yourself in the chat, your name and where you're from. And you know, it's great to know who's here, and we see that you have your names, but it's also great to know where you're from as you share that information. We will use the chat box for our Q&A. So please put your questions. If you think of something while we're presenting, please add that to the chat box. We'll take those questions towards the end, but don't wait until you've thought of that question. Our program is being recorded today and will be archived on the GSA website. And we ask you to keep your video off and your audio on mute until we get to the question and answer portion of this session. And that will also be part of the recording. So if you missed something, you'll be able to hear that as well. So my name's Trish D'Antonio. I'm Vice President of Policy and Professional Affairs here at the Gerontological Society of America. And what we hope by the end of today's webinar is that you have a better understanding of GSA's summer policy internship. And you get some of those insider tips that you feel you need to successfully submit your application. I want to remind you that the deadline for the application is February 6th. And so let's go over the agenda first. So we'll briefly introduce the program. I'll introduce you to some of our previous interns who have really helped put this webinar together today. And then we'll go over some of the details about how to apply successfully for the program. And then we'll open it to Q&A because maybe there's something that you think of here that we haven't presented. So I also, before we begin, want to include the namesakes of our program. And our summer policy internship is named in honor of and in memory of some excellent policy scholars and longtime members of GSA and actually good friends, Dr. Catherine Heyer and Dr. Greg O'Neill. And it's our hope that with this internship, we continue to honor their legacy and their activity in gerontology. So I just wanted to take that brief moment to recognize them and honor their memories. So it would probably be helpful to introduce you to some of our colleagues on the phone today or on the webinar today. So I'm going to just ask them to briefly introduce themselves. Hannah, if you could kick it off for us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Mori, or Hannah Scablo, and I'm a PhD student in Human Development and Family Science at the University of Missouri. Most of my research examines the intersection between close relationships, views in aging, and health. But I also do some work on the association between early life socioeconomic position and later life cognitive functioning.
Thanks. And Lillian?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lillian Azer, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Riverside in the Cognition and Cognitive Neuroscience area of the Psychology Department. My research focuses on attention and working memory, but most of my dissertation work is on the interaction between cognitive and motor function in older and younger adults.
And unfortunately, Danielle Yaneza is unable to join us today. She was another summer policy internship in 2022. I also want to give a shout out on the call to my colleague Karen Homer, who is our public policy and professional affairs coordinator, and she's running the slides behind the scene for us and helps keep me in line for sure, but keep us in line for applications and processes. So Karen's on the call. And then hopefully our colleague Brian Lindbergh, who is GSA's policy advisor, will join us as well today. So again, I'm Trish D'Antonio and so glad to be here. So a brief overview of the internship program. So we know for sure we have 2 internship positions. Last year we were able to take 4 because of some donations, so we'll see how that goes. But we definitely have 2 positions committed. This is an 8-week program. We are increasing that from last year based on the recommendations from our previous interns, that 6 just didn't seem enough, because when you finally get to know everything, then we're saying goodbye. But it is in DC. And we work from the GSA headquarters. There is a stipend of $6,000 to help support transportation and living costs. And so the program runs in the summer, and we have some flexible dates between May and August. But this is really like a time where you can engage much more with congressional activities, with administrative activities in the policy area. You really do become immersed in the aging related policy development and participate in that on a national process. So what will your day look like? And we could go to the next slide as a policy intern. So exact tasks, it's not like it's a task-driven everyday type of thing, but there are priorities, and some of the duties can include attending congressional hearings, researching and analyzing some of the issues that we know are coming up to help us have our members' research available as policymakers are delving into different topics, participating in meetings with federal agencies and in national coalitions. GSA is involved in a little over 30 coalitions, and so becoming part of those coalition meetings and supporting activities there. Monitoring legislation and regulations that are moving through Congress or moving through the administration. Contributing to public policy and aging reports. So that's our quarterly publication. Helping with the editorial, working with some of the editors and some of the activities that can help inform future issues of public policy and aging report. The interns have helped with us developing some of our policy sessions for the annual scientific meeting, as well as this year we launched an opportunity for our interns to present themselves about how the policy internship impacts thinking on career development, thinking on their own research and how that's impacted there. And then attending other networking events with GSA staff. So there are different activities that go on throughout the year, but in particular in the summer, there's a little bit more. And so being able to help us represent at those meetings. So let's turn a little bit more to what our qualifications are. So it's very straightforward. You're enrolled in a graduate program or have graduated from a program within the last 6 months. It's related to aging, that program. We seek applicants with a strong interest in policy and strong organization and communication skills. So we kind of ask about that in the application and in the interview process. And you do need to have the ability to live in the DC metro area throughout the duration of the program. Although it's not a requirement, we do give preference to applicants who are actively involved with GSA. So that's our qualifications, pretty straightforward up on the website. I think probably what would really be helpful for you all is to hear from your peers, your colleagues who have participated in the internship. So I thought we could just, I'll ask Hannah and Lillian to unmute. We could just have a little bit of a conversation, to kind of talk about some of the questions that we hear most often from potential applicants. So Hannah, if we could start with you, talk to me about a day in the life of a GSA policy intern.
So first of all, I want to say that no day is the same, which I know is kind of an annoying answer for folks who are looking for a picture of what this is, but it just is true. So one piece of stability I could say is that your core hours are 10 to 4. So it's a really manageable work-life balance. Within that 10 to 4 period, though, what you're doing is going to be a little bit different every day. So we would often attend some kind of meeting or more than one meeting in that day, and that might be a congressional hearing, it might be updates with new pharmaceutical developments, it might be meeting with national coalition partners or regulatory agencies. It just depends on what's happening that day. And then we would also usually spend some time researching specific policy details. That could be an ongoing project that we were working on, something that was interesting to us personally, or something that was a priority for GSA. And it also could just be an email that was flown into our inbox that says, hey, here's some news that just came out. Let's look more into what this means, right? What exactly is the ARPA-H program, and how might that impact GSA members and their research and their opportunities for funding, for instance. I was interested in retirement legislation, and so there were a few bills on the floor, and so I was looking into details about how that might impact retirement for older adults. And then occasionally we would also attend offsite events. Those are really great networking opportunities. Some of those might just be a lunch with somebody that you're interested in meeting, or sometimes it was a larger symposium of scholars or of experts in the field, and you would attend, and then afterwards there would be some opportunity to meet people one-on-one. And then we also had independent projects that we were working on sort of continuously over the course of the summer, and we would dabble in and out of those throughout the day.
Well, thank you. Lillian, do you want to add a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think Hannah covered everything, but there is some things I want to touch a little bit more on. So Hannah is right. So our day-to-day activities are in the GSA internship are not going to look the same, but you may have a project that you'll work on throughout the entire time. So that'll be some sort of continuity from day to day that you would work on after you attend the meetings. And as Hannah mentioned, she was interested in different issues, and there was a bill being proposed at the time. We had the flexibility to attend different hearings for bills that were interesting or aligned with our interests. So it was nice to have that flexibility to get to choose which ones we could attend that had issues impacting older adults that we were interested in.
And I'm really pleased to see that Danielle's been able to join us. So if you could just take a minute, introduce yourself and where you're from. And Danielle, maybe you could start us with some things that you worked on individually.
Definitely. Hi, everyone. Apologies for the delay. I'm just kind of running around a little bit. I'm in the hospital today for my shift. So I'm Danielle. I'm a third-year counseling psych PhD student over at the University of Houston. And I was the fourth intern over the summers. So it may have been mentioned that we kind of started a little bit staggered, but we all overlapped for during a couple of times, which was super awesome. So I had worked on a couple of different things. I'm sure Hannah and Lillian and Trish gave you really great info on what was happening. So besides the stuff that we had overlapped on, I also worked on a couple of communications that went out to the GSA community and I believe one of the other communities, and we ended up using those for various presentations, whether it was in GSA and kind of outside. So what was really cool about that is I really got to work on my policy communication skills, both written and verbally. And that's something I was really interested in because it's a little bit different than academic writing than clinical settings. So it was kind of figuring out how can I can be as succinct as possible and really convey my message, because something that Trish had told us really early on is that policy people only have so much time for us. So it's really making sure that we're concise and efficient and doing that to the best of our ability. So that's something I really enjoyed. And I had looked into the various topics that I was interested in. So advanced care planning was one of them. There's also kind of a project that floated around a little bit. So I got to see what GSA members and just kind of the scientific community, broadly speaking, was working on with advanced care planning and how that could be communicated and what was going on policy-wise. So something that I found to be really helpful and informative for me was seeing how our research, both as students and then our professors and so on, was being used on the Hill. And that was like really interesting because it kind of have felt for me like, oh, like, you know, why are we doing this research? It takes forever, right? But there are various ways that this research is being used in the real world. So that was really super interesting to kind of see, and really helpful for me too, because I was figuring out what am I really interested in, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a little bit about what we talked about. And then Trish, let me know if I actually answered your question or not.
You did, thank you.
Okay.
And I think what I'd like to do is hear, I know Hannah and Lillian gave us a broad swath of what you all did as interns, but maybe Lillian, can you share some specifics that you worked on?
Yeah, I worked on tracking the annual appropriations for the 2023 fiscal year. So we put together a spreadsheet for the 2022 approvals and then the budgets that's being requested for 2023. And that was one of the projects that I mentioned that you'll work on throughout your internship, and it'll get passed along to other interns as they join the program at a later time. We also worked on creating thematic analysis of these appropriations that we put together. And one really cool thing that I was really excited to work on, I attended the advisory committee on immunization practice meeting, and I helped Trish with developing the GSA commentary that was submitted to the CDC on the ACIP recommendations.
Which I can say eventually were approved, so that was great. Hannah, how about your projects?
So one of my main projects was to work with the Public Policy and Aging Report. This is one of the journals that GSA puts out, and it's really designed to blend GSA members or aging professionals research in general with policy priorities. So how do we make this accessible for not necessarily an academic audience? And so they're already short articles, but as Danielle mentioned, already short in academic terms isn't necessarily short in policy terms. And so I worked closely with Brian Lindbergh to take an issue of Public Policy and Aging Report that focused on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias and really consolidated into what are actionable policy priorities that are described throughout this entire issue. How do we make this a one double-sided page document that we can then disseminate to congressional staff? And so then they can describe it probably even more briefly to their member of Congress. And then we can get this kind of research translated directly into action. So that was one of my favorite projects because it felt like there was real tangible impact that I could see happening. I also helped to create a marketing campaign for the internship. So things that we could put on social media or on the website to tell people about what this internship is and how it has been beneficial for us. And then I hinted at this briefly earlier, but I also helped to track and analyze retirement legislation. And so you can see some of that in Brian Lindbergh's column. He has a policy column in Gerontology News. So some of my contributions are evident there.
So thank you. Of course, I like to think that everything is rosy and works all without a problem while we're going through the internship, but I know that there are some challenges that come before you guys, and I was just wondering if you could share those too. I think it's really important that we put that out there just as much as all the great opportunities that there are associated with the internship. Lillian, do you want to start there?
Yeah, so on our first day, and I'm sure Eileen, Hannah, and Danielle might agree with this, you get thrown into the fire. So you set up your computer and then you just start right away. And there's a lot of acronyms that we may not be familiar with. So that was one of the challenge, trying to understand what is ACIP, for example. So that was one challenge in the beginning, but we handled that by creating a list just so we could reference as needed. And there's a lot of multitasking, which is pretty challenging, but it's great skill to learn. It helps you further develop your time management skills and being able to work on multiple things at one time.
I forgot about that list that you guys created. Danielle?
Definitely. So I think one of the biggest things was do the readings in the beginning. So it's kind of just becoming familiar with the lingo, the language that policy uses. So that I had found to be really helpful. And I think kind of outside of specifically for the internship would be just managing your schedule. So I'm sure you all are really busy in your graduate programs. So just kind of figuring out when you can, when you're gonna have the time for the internship. So Trish was super flexible with when I could do my start date, which was really appreciated. So I was able to kind of do my classes, do some clinical rotation, and then come in. So that's just something for you to, for planning people to start thinking about, you know, when can those weeks look like for you in the summer, and have an idea of what that's going to look like.
And Hannah?
I found finding housing to be more challenging than I expected it to be. And so in the end, everything worked out really well for me. I had a great place that was within walking distance of the office. It was really ideal, but it took some serious time. So I would recommend not putting that off until the last minute. There are definitely a lot of options in DC, but it's also expensive. And so for short-term rentals, that can add up really quickly. I would recommend looking at sublets for other college students or graduate students who may not be from DC, but are leaving for the summer to go back to their parents' house or wherever they want to spend that summer. And so that's a good way that you can find things. But yeah, I would not rest on that one.
Okay, so I was thinking, Hannah, maybe you could start and talk a little bit about what you found beneficial. And then now that you've had a few months distance from the internship, what have you really taken? Has any of this, would you say it shaped some of your career development?
No question, yes. So what did I find beneficial? I think I should back up and say that I came into this policy internship without a strong policy background. So I was really interested in policy, but I don't come from a public policy program. My policy experience academically or formally was really limited to writing the policy implications of my research. And I really wanted to grow that and create a stronger foundation for myself, which is part of why I pursued the internship. And so this really helped me to demystify the policy process. One thing that I really appreciate about it is that we were able to witness policymaking at all stages in the process. So you get to see what's happening at the very beginning when a relationship is being formed between two organizations. You get to see what that looks like once it's a year in, and you get to see what a great achievement looks like that people have been working towards for years, right? You really get a picture of the entire process at all points in that timeline. And we also were exposed to a substantial breadth of policy. So we all come into this from really different academic backgrounds and with really different research interests. And we're not pigeonholed just into our specific focus. We all get exposed to all the great research that GSA is doing, whether that's in something like oral health or vaccines, right? These are areas that I really didn't have any experience with at all, but I could understand how the policy and research that I was interested in also tied into these realms. And so it's a really great way to understand not only all of the policy that happens within the GSA network, but also how that intersection between research and policy is crafted. Oh, and you asked about career paths. Yes, also that too. So I am in my 4th year of my PhD program, so I'm not yet on the job market, to my great relief. But I have sometimes struggled with confidence in my research. Most of what I study is called self-perceptions of aging and how we feel about our own aging process and how that impacts health, how other people shape that, our belief system and vice versa. And I am one of few people in my program who are interested in gerontology. And so this internship gave me vast validation and confidence in the work that I do. I would move through these spaces with policymakers and legislators and scholars and practitioners who were all mentioning the kind of research that I'm doing and the kind of work that I think is important. And so that really solidified for me that I'm on the right track. And so it was validating both personally and professionally. Looking to the future, it has also given me insight into what career paths look like outside of academia. I haven't had many opportunities to understand what that looks like. And so you get a really up close look at what career paths might be in policy focused fields, but also in the nonprofit space. So Trish helped us set up meetings with all of the leadership staff at GSA. And so we really got to understand, how does an organization like this run, right? Where do each of us fit within this process of keeping the organization afloat and successful?
Thank you. Lillian, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, so I, like Hannah, I didn't have much policy experience. I took a science of policy course in my university, but I didn't have real experience with how aging, for example, informs policy, or cognitive aging informs policy. And being part of this internship, I was exposed to a lot of different areas outside of my research. I am focused primarily on cognition and cognitive neuroscience, but during the internship, you're exposed in areas like oral health, like Hannah mentioned, and chronic pain, which is one area that I was really interested in. And before being part of this internship, I never considered how chronic pain can play a big role in my area of research in cognition. So the internship helped me understand that more and apply more of these measures in my research. And now that it's been a few months after my internship, I am on the job market. So I've changed my thought process of different jobs that I'm interested in. Now I'm looking more in implementation science, postdocs, or industry jobs. So it helped really shape the direction I want to take my career.
And Danielle, we know you're still going through your clinicals, but how did this internship impact you and your career development?
Definitely. So I always had an interest in policy, but to be honest, I was like, what is policy and how do I do it? So I had more of a local level programming background, and I was like, okay, so that's kind of one way that you influence change or are able to impact the community, but what does policy actually look like? So that's what I was really able to grasp through this internship. So it was one, super cool to see it at the federal level, but it always trickles down. So it either is coming up locally, going all the way up, or starting federally and going all the way down. So being able to conceptualize that and really understanding the what, the how, and the why of policy, I found super informative. With that, it's certainly giving me ideas of what I want to continue doing. So I definitely have a clinical career in mind, but I know that there's other areas that my skills and my interests can fall in policy and programming that might be a little bit even stronger than research at this point. So it's kind of figuring out how I can fit that into a position. So whether that's at an institution where we do our own programming and policy that affects the community, or maybe something a little bit broader. So it certainly will depend, but just having that background now of policy, understanding how it's created, has given me ideas of like what I want to do within my program and within this the hospital shift that I'm doing now. So it was just super helpful, and it's also a lot of fun.
I'm glad that it was fun. Thank you. So one question I want to ask, and I've heard you all talk about networking in a very broad sense. And I was wondering, and I'll toss this out, whoever wants to answer first. But were there some specific networking opportunities that you feel you engaged with that were really helpful, or that you want to highlight today for people to just kind of show how we're able to connect people?
I'm going to take an easy one, but one that was like really that I love so much was networking with the interns. So we all come from different universities and different backgrounds, but being able to see where our research kind of lies, and one of our big focuses is just older adults and gerontology in general, really brought us together. So as a quick example, Eileen, one of the other interns who's not here, I had her as a speaker at one of my conferences for the New York Academy, because I really loved her dissertation, and it was about community health, which was our theme. And I was like, Eileen, please be on my conference. And she was like, okay. So like, that was just super cool. And we are all in touch. We were able to collaborate for the conference, the GSA conference as well, on a session. So that was cool as well to see, and something that I really enjoyed. And also, as like being the intern that came the last, I was a little worried. I was like, oh no, I'm not going to get to know them, but I was able to. So that was really great.
Well, first, I want to second everything that Danielle said. It really has been a fabulous opportunity just to meet these other interns who are so motivated by the same things that motivate me. We got to work a lot independently, but also collaboratively throughout the entire experience, which I think really strengthened that relationship too. And then I alluded to this earlier, but we were able to attend some offsite events. So there were a couple that really stood out to me. One was an event through AARP. It was on the longevity economy. And so there were speakers from all kinds of institutions like the Urban Institute or the National Academy of Medicine or the International Longevity Center. And then they also had folks who were memoirists and entrepreneurs, everybody who's interested in doing this aging work. And then it followed with kind of a mingling networking session. So you could really meet people one-on-one and get to gush about how you loved their presentation and exchange business cards. And then there was another session near the end of my tenure there, which was an aging symposium at Georgetown. So it was all of the faculty members at Georgetown and some just within the DC area in general who were interested in aging work. They may not necessarily be in the same department, which was really exciting because then it meant that there were sessions that were focused on medicine, others on psychology, others sociology, others urban planning. And again, you get to chat with folks who were in the audience as well as the speakers. So I'm still in contact with some of the people that I met at that session. So I would really recommend taking advantage of any of those kinds of opportunities that the internship provides.
And to echo Danielle and Hannah, I'm really appreciative that I had the opportunity to work with the other interns and learn more about their research. Sometimes as a grad student, you're so focused on your area that it may be difficult to go out and talk to other grad students from varying areas of research like communication or clinical sites. So it was really nice to hear about their work and aging. But in addition to that, I do want to highlight that from the start of your internship, Trish and Brian will tell you repeatedly, let us know who you want to meet and we'll form the introduction, help you with your networking, take advantage of that. One of the opportunities Brian and Trish provided me was I was able to get introduced to members from the geriatric workforce. And I'm still in contact with them. We're working together on a manuscript currently on policy recommendations. So that's very new because I'm not used to writing that type of academic work. So it provided networking opportunities and I'm learning a new skill at the same time. So if you are part of the internship, I recommend take advantage of that and create a list of who you want to meet within some reason. And Trish and Brian will provide all the resources to connect you with that person.
Yeah, I think didn't I say if you want to meet the president, I'm not sure I can do that, but we'll do our best to try and get you somebody at the White House on White House staff, right? So I think that's one thing that's really important to recognize and realize that, and hopefully as GSA members, you realize this too, just the opportunity to connect with so many different people because of our interdisciplinary nature of the organization, because so many organizations rely on the evidence base that our members provide. We do have contacts throughout the policy world, and so the reason I always say this is like, well, I might not know the person, Brian might not know the person directly, but sometimes just having our GSA name or some of our colleagues that we work with might know that person and be able to get that contact and that interaction. And in general, I think, as you probably experience with academic colleagues in mentorship, people like to be asked, and policymakers are the same, where there's opportunity and time. They definitely want to be able to share and learn more about our interns. So it's really great. So I guess one last question that I want to ask is that, what advice would you have for future applicants? Lillian, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice is start working on your application early. It will take you, it's not too intensive, but it will take you some time to work on the application, especially requesting transcripts or letter of recommendations. Start early with that process. And if you are offered the internship, make sure you check the weather before you go, especially if you're on the West Coast where it's a little drier, pack accordingly.
I think we joked because of the summer and there's so many thunderstorms here. Make sure you have a good umbrella. Hannah?
I think it's wise to remember that this is meant to be a learning experience. I think so often when we're writing applications, it's like, look at everything that I already know and how beneficial I can be to you. This is really, they don't expect you to know it all, right? It's a teaching experience, it's a learning experience for you. And so I think it's totally fine to say, here's the experience that I have in policy, if that's experience that you have. It's also fine to say, here are all the things that I want to learn, and here's everything that I want to glean and gain from the internship, if that's your situation too. It's fine to be honest about wherever you are on that journey.
And Danielle?
What I would add would be just highlighting your leadership experience. So I would definitely say that you all probably have something going on in your programs that's not just coursework. So talk about that and how it can be used for policy. So even if you're just kind of trying to conceptualize what does policy mean and what does it look like for you, as in like how you can kind of do it, think about that, and then in combination with what you've already done. So there probably is some type of commonality or something, or how a skill can be used in your leadership for policy work. So I would definitely highlight that as well in your short answers.
Was there a question that I didn't ask you that you thought I would? No? Okay. Well, we'll move on, and I would invite you all again to put your questions in the chat. But before we go to the Q&A, thanks Karen for advancing this slide. Let's talk a little bit about the application materials. The application does involve a couple short answer questions. They are meant to be short for a reason, right? Because we were talking a little bit earlier about, how can you really succinctly give us some information about yourself. When we present on coalitions and they're before a policymaker, if I get 2 minutes to be able to describe GSA and our interest in the issue, that's a long time. So we really try to get you to think about that as you start. We do request a copy of your resume or your CV, a letter of recommendation that gets attached there in the application, and then a recent transcript to show us that you are enrolled in the program or recently. If you scan that QR code, you'll be able to get right to the application. And I know that Karen was planning on adding, she did, there it is, a link. If you want to have the link directly, that's in the chat. Applications are due Friday, February 6th. At close of business Eastern time, so it's 5 p.m. Eastern time. And then we'll go through those applications and conduct interviews. It's our hope to have decisions announced on or about March 1st. So it is a pretty quick process once things start rolling. I can tell you that we have had some completed applications submitted already, which I was very excited to see. And then, so I guess for Lillian and Hannah and Danielle, anything that you want to add about what you did as you prepare for the application? I know, Lillian, you gave us a little bit of information about starting early, but anything else when you were applying that you think is important to share? And it's okay if the answer is no, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I think Danielle kind of highlighted on this. So think about any other experience you have and how it ties to policy. It's really important to consider your work outside of academic work or coursework, as Danielle mentioned, and think about how applying that and how the application will shape your future career as you answer the questions.
Okay. Thank you. And so, you know, as we're moving forward, you have the information on how to apply for the internship. We did record, this session is being recorded. We will share a link by email, the email that you use to register, so that you know that this has been posted on the GSA site, and you'll be able to have access to that. Reiterating our timeline here that we talked about. And then I'll just ask that we move to our Q&A. I'm starting to sort some of the questions that I've seen, but before I go to those questions, let me ask you, one of the things that I think is really important for people to understand is about living in the area, right? So it's not directly in DC, right? Lillian, maybe you could share a little bit about your experience too, but being able to come into the office each day. So would you guys share a little bit about that? Danielle, you want to go?
Yeah, definitely. So I had stayed kind of in two areas. So I had a situation where I did an Airbnb for just, I think it was around 10 days. That was about 20 minutes from the office. I can't exactly remember, but it was like outside of the Adams Morgan area. And then I moved to the Adams Morgan area because through my mentor who had sent out, I had told her I was going to DC and my housing situation, she had put on one of her like academic professional sites that her student was looking at this. And then basically a colleague's colleague had said that they were looking for a cat sitter. So I was able to stay in her spot and cat sit to the cats. They were really cute. I'm a dog person though, just to let you know. And I was able to cat sit, take care of the cats, and then commute to the office. And also I scootered almost every day and it was so fun. So I'm from New Jersey, but I'm currently down in Texas, and the commuting situation is very different from the Northeast and down here. So being able to commute to work, I thoroughly enjoyed and I highly recommend. And then I would kind of walk back. So that's how my housing had looked at. I was a little bit delayed in booking my Airbnb, and it's been mentioned, do it early. Definitely do it early. So they usually tell you kind of where it is, and Trish gives you actually know where the office is. It's on the GSA website, the address. So try to be kind of close. The metro is very nice though, pretty smooth, very easy to understand. So that's also an option as well. So metro and bus. I didn't do the bus, but the bus is something too. But if you can scooter, I also highly recommend that one. So that's how I had did it. So I did Airbnb and then a cat sitting situation in Adams Morgan, which I do recommend as well.
So Lillian, I know you had a different kind of commute. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I actually stayed with a family member who lives about an hour away, somewhere in Maryland. So I ended up actually renting a car, and I was commuting to the office. And there's a lot of resources for you to figure out parking, because if you're like me, you like to pre-plan, but parking is everywhere. But if you choose to stay further out like I did, just be aware that 20 miles in your hometown is not the same time in commuting, and more traffic congested area. So that is something that I was not aware of in the beginning until I looked at how long it would take the morning up.
And Hannah, how about you? You had mentioned a little bit during your presentation, but anything else you'd want to add?
I had a similar situation to Danielle in that I stayed in two different places throughout my tenure. So I spent the first chunk of it in an Airbnb just north of Adams Morgan. I had planned to use the bike share system, which you can look up in advance and you can see where those stations are. There's, in my experience, really always a bike when you might need one. But the bus was really accessible and fast for me. So I ended up using the bus system. And then the second part of my internship, I stayed in the apartment of some family friends who just by coincidence were going to be out of town for that entire time. So that worked out really nicely for me. And they were about a 30-minute walk from the office. So I walked most days, which ended up being really lovely. It is hot in DC, but it's still nice to get a little bit of sun.
So, and I also wanted, I mean, you do have an opportunity to spend a portion of time, significant portion of time in the DC metro area. And how What did you do outside of the time that you were here for the intern, specifically working on the internship? Lillian, you want to go first? Because I know you you were moving around.
Yeah, when I was not working in the internship, I had the opportunity to drive up to Philly. I visited a couple of different places in Pennsylvania. I went to many outlets. It's really nice to explore your surroundings and definitely explore DC. There's a lot that the area has to offer. Just make the best out of it and enjoy yourself.
Hannah?
There are also so many fabulous free events in DC that I found that I really didn't have to spend money if I didn't want to, and I could still have a really active life on the weekends and when I wasn't at work. So all of the museums, of course, are really fabulous. I spent a lot of time just wandering through different museums on my way home from work or on the weekends. And there are a lot of festivals that happen too. So you can go to different neighborhoods and find some other festival that's happening, especially in the summer. It's a great time just to get outside and really take in everything that the city has to offer.
And Danielle?
I really enjoyed checking out the food scene. So there's a lot of good food and a lot of different cuisines. So I really enjoyed that. As well as I did a bunch of like the free like museum stuff. I got my Library of Congress card. So that was fun. Checked out the monuments because I hadn't seen them in a little bit. I also was a little bit closer to my family, so I was able to see them for a couple of weekends. It's just a super movable and commutable city. So I did a lot of walking, and then like if I was going up to New Jersey, I took either the Amtrak or just the New Jersey Transit, whatever that one was called. So that one was really doable as well. But definitely like for my weekends, I either planned something out, was meeting up with people, or kind of taking some time exploring the scenery, doing some runs, those types of things. So it's just really fun to be in an urban city, but also kind of get that kind of homey feel for me.
Great. So we did have some time for colleagues to enter some questions into the chat. Gabrielle, are you okay with coming on and asking your question directly, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I don't mind. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. It sounds like a wonderful internship. It also sounds like, not to make assumptions, that you all sort of had this as your main focus plus your dissertation. I was wondering if there's ever been an intern that has had a dependent, either a child or a parent they're taking care of, and how you make that work, you know, particularly because GSA, I thought this might be a little more flexible, but so far it seems like it's pretty dead set on the schedule and being in person all the time.
So for this, because of the experience, and being able to interact, a lot of things are and in fact, this summer, I anticipated even being more in person, to really get the experience of being inside a room. We have required applicants to be able to be here for the time of the internship. I do know that during COVID, we had someone who worked offsite, and we were a little flexible with some days, but not the entire internship in this past summer, right? So there were some days, and in fact, Lillian, wasn't it about a week, right? You went back to California. So we're flexible in that way, but it really, the opportunity to really like get in a room, and this is where people are going to talk, right? You're not going to see it on a webinar where, you know, like to understand, you know, the term that gets used inside the Beltway here is how the sausage gets made. Like the sausage makers, you get more when you're standing next to them or sitting next to them in a room than what we've done. I think if somebody could make a good case for splitting some time, we'd be able to consider that. But I don't think we could consider like completely offsite, because that would just be challenging. And I don't know if you guys can talk a little bit about why, because this past summer, things didn't open up as much as we had been first told, right? Because there was a bump up in COVID again. But I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that about your experience being here versus if you were at home working or wherever it is offsite.
I could jump in since I had to leave a week early from the internship and did that last week remotely. It was definitely a different experience working the last week remotely. I know some of the other interns were able to attend by that time some in-person meetings that I had missed out on. I was able to attend virtually, but the experience is very different virtual versus being in person and actually being able to network with others in person.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about it's not what happens in the meeting, but the 10 minutes before and the 10 minutes after, or you share the cab ride back. And I think that's like to try and understand how that really happens, and how important that really is in policymaking. So that's where we've been to date on this. Isabel asked a question. Are you comfortable coming on and asking that question, or do you want me to just?
Yeah, sorry, my video is not turning on. There we go. I had a question about the application itself. I was looking over the questions, the short answer questions, and just wondering kind of in that last question about why science matters in policy, if you have any kind of like tips or insight into kind of what you're looking for. I think that question is new this year, so like, why did you add it? Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
Colleagues, would you like to answer that?
I think it's actually a great question. And I think, well, I don't know exactly why Trish added it, but I would kind of gander that, what is the connection between doing science, doing that work, and then how is it related to policy? What are the purposes of this? What are these results mean, and how we're going to use it for the community? Would be how I would kind of look at that question. It's definitely a really great question. So I think it's kind of about, I would say, like being informed. How are you using the work that you do or that you want to find out about, and how is that going to influence the policy that's going to be created? So kind of evidence-based research, going along the lines of evidence-based research is what I would think about.
And I also think a great example of why science matters in policy, if you think about the influenza vaccine, that was a big topic during our internship. A lot of the work being presented was based on the scientific research, and they were using that research and clinical trials to make the argument that older adults should receive a certain type of vaccine. So these recommendations were being provided to policymakers. So think about, like Danielle mentioned, think about your area of work or research, and how that matters in making recommendations and policies. So why is the work we're doing important for us to be able to let policymakers know these are the recommendations and this is why it should be followed?
Yeah, I think with this past few years and some of the attack on science and the attack on research, and we think it's important that as you're coming in here, recognizing the importance of how we need to bring this forward, how we need to continue to reiterate the importance of translating this research into evidence-based policy. And you'll hear, if you're here this summer, you'll hear me say it, if not every day, at least 3 days of the week, because it's so important. And just want to kind of get your idea on it, what your thoughts are. I will tell you this, the only wrong answer is that science does not inform policy, right? But be creative about what you feel your work, your colleagues' work, it doesn't have, but how does that impact policy, and how does that impact what we hear communicated to the world? And that has impact for the public, right? So think about that, and what does that mean? Christina, I saw that you had posted a question. Are you willing? Oh, great. Good to see you. Could you?
Yes, I'm willing to ask my question. Thank you so much to the panelists. I think all of the answers were really helpful, and I feel like some of it was really relevant to my experience as well. I'm not quite on the job market yet, but I've always been interested in policy. And through my program, I haven't had that much of an opportunity to get into policy work. And when I am on the job market, I want to keep my options open. I do want to apply for government jobs and potentially nonprofit jobs. So this was all very helpful. My question is that it was mentioned that we were going to be working a normal business hour from like 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. I was wondering if you were able to manage working on your other projects back at your home institution, like your dissertation or any other manuscripts you were working on. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a somewhat like a toned down lab project I had to keep going throughout the summer. So I did that mostly in the evenings. If you have really good time management skills, that's great. And then if you're a little iffy on them, I would kind of start with your planning process and figuring out, okay, so I have the internship work to do, and then we also do get a lunch. So if you have to plug in and do some work during your lunch, that's possible as well. And then kind of do it the rest of it in the evening. So I had maybe a little bit longer days than other summers, but I really made it work, and I kept everything as enjoyable as possible. So it wasn't my favorite thing to do work after work, but you got to get it done.
I want to make sure we get to the two other questions. Lillian and Hannah, do you have anything to add to that would be different from what Danielle said? Okay. Elisa or Eliza?
Yeah, hi, Elisa.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. I was just wondering about the projects that you guys all mentioned, how those came about. Did you have to have something in mind that you wanted to work on, or did the program kind of give you a general idea of things that you can work on while you were there during the summer?
I think both, really. So part of it depends on if you have a well-crafted vision for what you want to do, but any internship, they want it to be mutually beneficial for the interns and the organization too. And so sometimes projects would come through that was like, hey, can somebody do this? Or can you specifically do this? And other times we would bring it to them and say, hey, I'm really interested in X topic, and I see that there's congressional focus on this. Can I go ahead and attend these things and write up some briefs that I think would be beneficial for GSA members? So there's flexibility to do both there.
I think, we start out with some conversation the first week that you're here to learn about that. I could also tell you that there are some things that are unplanned, because if Senator X wakes up on a Monday and announces something that's going to impact aging, guess what? We're all pivoting. So that's kind of the other piece to that. And Bailey, are you comfortable? Oh, okay, you're on already. Great.
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and jump in. Thank you again for sharing all your answers and experiences. It was really interesting. I just had a question to kind of tag along with the previous question. And I think this was touched upon a little bit earlier, but with the experiences and the projects that you were working on, did you then submit that to GSA or submit that for publications or manuscripts that you were submitting to conferences or different journals?
Who wants to go? 3 minutes left, So
we put together a symposium with four last year's interns. And that was really meant to bridge what we gained from the internship, what we learned from the internship, with our own research focus on future directions. So it was really individual. They were very different between each of us, but I think together it was a good demonstration of the breadth of the work that we do and also that we gained from the internship.
one thing I would add is we also, for the interns that were here during our summer board meeting, invited you all, remember, to present to the board of directors for GSA, right? So that's a different way to interact with leadership, but also to make our leaders aware of what it is that you're participating in the summer when you're here, so that it's not just there's really activity and action going on. It's not just a come in and watch Trish work kind of activity. So from that perspective, I think it's really important as well. I know we are coming up to our 2-minute close. remember, we provided you with those links. Hopefully you've taken a look at the application. We look forward to reading your applications, reviewing them for consideration. And if you do have any additional questions, there's a link up on the website for submitting questions to us, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. I see that Hannah and Danielle and Lillian have also provided their email addresses if you want to speak with them directly. And to close us out for a minute, I see that our policy advisor, Brian Lindbergh, has joined us. Just want to give a shout out for him. If you haven't met Brian before, if you haven't read his column in Gerontology News, it's page 4 and 5 every month. Very important to take a look at. It might help inform your application. Brian, if you just wanted to say hi real quick.
Sure, I'm glad to join you all today, and we've had such success with this program. I'm hopeful that a lot of you are interested and submit applications. Thanks.
Thanks. And so again, as we were talking earlier, the Opportunity Network, Brian has had a long and very experienced career here, working up on the Hill, working as a consultant, not just for GSA, but for others in policy arena. So that's where that breadth of our knowledge and our reach is really helpful and important. So I just want to thank you all. Have a fantastic weekend, and look forward to seeing your applications.